Hey everybody, welcome back to Insider Guys Industry Chat. My name is James Martin. I'm privileged today here to be joined by Craig Foster. Many of you may know him from his appearances as a sports commentator and analyst for SBS. He achieved on-field success here in Australia and abroad. Perhaps most notably, he had his time as a captain for the Socceroos before moving into his media career. More recently, Craig has been shining a light on a range of human rights issues, both in Australia and abroad. And perhaps most notably, he led the people-powered movement to bring home Hakeem al-Arabi to Australia from a Thai prison after an attempt by the Bahraini government to extradite him. Craig has agreed to join us today to continue this discussion we're having about the support for international students during this difficult time. In particular, Craig's Play for Lives campaign brings together food, sport, and community in a uniquely effective way to help provide much needed support to vulnerable communities, including refugees, migrants, and international students. Thanks for joining us today, Craig.
That's okay, James. Good to join you.
Thanks. Cool. Well, let's get started here. International students are just one part of the equation when it comes to the community affected by COVID-19. What are your thoughts on the way that students have been treated and supported across the community?
Well, it's awful. And I think a large number of Australians feel that that's the case. This pandemic, what it's done, in essence, is reduced humanity to a sense of, as near as we've seen in our lifetimes, of equality. And of course, there's economic inequality here. There's, rich and poor, people in poverty, vulnerable communities, homeless, and all these people are disproportionately affected. However, this pandemic, we've seen that no one is immune. They might be able to create their own environments of safety a little bit better than others, but we've seen Hollywood actors, and we've seen heads of state, and we've seen everyone in the community understand that we're all the same when it comes to a virus like this. And that's the real essence, I think, many in Australia are going to take out of this pandemic, is to say, well, actually, we are all the same. And I think a lot of us have used this moment to put a spotlight on the inequities that already existed in society, or those that have been exposed during this period. So the ones that existed around homelessness, around refugees, asylum seekers, around people who are already in vulnerable minority, many ethnic communities who already were struggling with support. And of course, during this time, it only exacerbates those problems. There's others that have come to light that have made us concerned. And many people in the country have raised their voice to say that we think it's inappropriate that any sector of society really misses out now. Why is it that any particular cohort in Australia right now, so Australian society means you are in our country and you can't, overwhelmingly likely that you can't go anywhere else. You are stuck with us for whatever reason you are here. And that means we have a moral responsibility to all of you. Now, international students are a really important one there, as are, of course, migrant workers, on temporary working visas and others. And both of those cohorts are incredibly important to society, and yet, largely because of the economic challenge, have been left out of all of these most of these support packages. That's, over the last month or so. Of course, we've seen a bit of a piecemeal approach now from different governments, Victoria and others, and we've seen various universities, provide their own support packages, some of them quite substantial. But in general, we could say that the international students were completely cast aside when it came to this discussion about, well, how do we support everyone, or who do we support? And, some of the rhetoric that was used was around, well, we're sorry, we can't, we have to look after Australians first. Well, what is an Australian? I mean, many of the students have been here for many years. Many of them are deeply embedded in the community. Forget the fact that, and this, of course, incredibly important, the international education sector is one of our largest export industries. So you would have thought, just even from an economic perspective, that you would want to treat the students, as well as possible. But further to that, of course, many of them have part-time work in hospitality industries and others. So they not only are they underpinning the education export industry, they're also underpinning many other casual worker industries in the country. So they're actually incredibly important. And finally, James, they're human beings, okay? And they're in our country. So they're with us. They're part of our community. How do you put a definition around a community member? Well, we're going to look after Australians. Well, these people are here now, okay? And they might have a passport elsewhere, but many of them, of course, will go on to make an immense contribution. Not only they're paying tax now, but they'll go on to professional roles within Australian society and industry and academia and sport and make a huge contribution to the country. And I think finally, and this is a bit of a verbose answer, but because it's a really important issue, finally, they also are adding to the diverse nature of the community, right? So they are part of the Latin American Australian community, the Vietnamese Australian community, the Nepalese, Australian community, who I've met just recently, the very diverse African Australian community, the diverse Asian community, and the like. They're a part of the substance of our society every day. And yet, when we got in trouble and we had to close the doors in some way, even though they were here, it's like they're in our house, and we say, well, look, you're here, but, please leave and, head back up the road. It's just amazing that we did so. I'm sad that that was the case. And a lot of great people around the country have responded by saying, look, we don't believe in that. We believe that they should have our support, and everyone have worked really hard to try and provide that.
It's such an interesting market because, it's like the only export market that when you stop exports, the product is still in the country. So it causes, it's a really difficult one. I'd love to move a little bit to how sport plays a role here. I mean, why do you think sport is an effective way to bring people together in a time of need?
Well, look, that's a truism, if you like, that, there's so many examples of how sport provides support for people. There's a million examples, right? I spoke to this incredible South Sudanese refugee and now AFLW player for Richmond yesterday for SBS. I interviewed her about her background and her work for AFL in the multicultural sector. Her name is Akek Makua Chuot, and she's an incredible success story and an amazing person. And when she was in a refugee camp in Kenya, it was sport that held them together as kids in many ways. Number one, trying to play, and her brothers would play football every day. And the other one, she was talking about how they loved Arsenal, and she was in a Kenyan refugee camp, and they were huge fans. I think she's a Liverpool fan. And so they were watching the Premier League every week. Somehow they would travel to a television somewhere. So when we talk about sport giving people hope, it can become trite, but it's actually real, right? And when you hear these stories, you can understand how particularly young people can really find some inspiration and some purpose through sport. It's incredible. It's incredible. Incredible feat. But when it comes to the international students, the reason that sport is also important is because many of them, of course, play sport while they're part of our sporting community, right? So, almost all this, well, not almost all, but there'd be a high proportion of students who would be studying here in tertiary institutions in Australia and would be connected into a sporting organisation or a gym or anything of that nature, right? So, how can we just turn around then and say, well, you're one of our members. I play with you on the weekend in my football team. But now that we're kind of in a bit of a sticky point, we'd prefer that you go home. Sport is about team. Sport is about, collective nature. Sport is about looking after each other. And we believe in those values. And these people are our teammates. And metaphorically, they're our Australian teammates. Right? And I just think it's important for the country to recognise that we have to look after people while they're here. It's simply not good enough to let anyone, if you like, be left, bereft of support at this time.
Sport in terms of participation is extremely important as a way to feel integrated into a community, but I guess it also from a professional sporting perspective, it allows you to have some sort of role models and some people in the community that are that you can look up to. I'd love to hear a bit more about your Play for Lives initiative. Can you tell us more about that program?
Yeah, so what happened is when the pandemic was about to hit, and we could see what was happening in China and Hong Kong and other places, it was clear that sport was going to be postponed, if not cancelled altogether. And so the idea became quickly, well, if we were going to commit ourselves to sport, that's a certain number of hours per week, 6, 7, 8 hours, travel and competition and training. Why can't we repurpose that to the benefit of the Australian community? And at the heart of sport is this concept of volunteerism and service to the community. We have always believed in that very strongly. I think perhaps in Australia, in the era of professionalisation of sport, perhaps that's been lost a little bit. It's something I certainly believe in really strongly. People used to go through and play and captain the over 35s in their local cricket team. They'd hit on the board, they'd become president, and they'd become life member. That was the trajectory of community sport, forever. And I want to see that preserved. So the idea was, what can sport do right now for Australia? Well, we can volunteer, or we can provide whatever service it is that vulnerable communities need. So we set up a platform, playforlives.org it's called, just a volunteering platform. And charities have been reaching out over the past month to ask for help from sport. That's from the very top, like Meals on Wheels, Cancer Council, Oz Harvest, but also at the granular level, local community charities who have the social trust of people in real need, actually every day, but in more need now. And it's those organisations that we want to see supported. So we've called on councils around the country, and here in the inner west, where I am at the moment, Edison Road Community Centre in Marrickville, as you can probably hear the rain coming down. We're here volunteering again today, almost every day for a couple of hours. We've wrapped the sporting community around these organisations. So, for instance, we've had 12 to 15 local sporting clubs actually physically volunteering here in their sporting gear. So, and they've been reaching out for funding and donations, tens of thousands of dollars we've been able to provide for this and other organisations, as well as packing food hampers and actually delivering them to vulnerable communities. So that's one good example. Variety in Victoria and Queensland have asked athletes to provide video messages of support to sick and isolated children. Really important. And so, that's underway now with some of the player associations in the country. Up in Brisbane, we've got 600 international students. So topical for your viewers, 600 international students and migrant workers got together on Facebook. They're called Oja Franca, and they reached out to me to say, we need food. They've got 4 donation points. So what we've done in Brisbane is we've got sporting clubs to step up and commit to 1 week of providing those food donations. So all they've got to do, the Brisbane Roar Supporters Foundation, which is their own charity, which is fabulous, a great group of guys up there in that football fans group, they've taken carriage of it, and they've already made a couple of deliveries of goods. So all they do is we're asking sporting last night, the president, just say to it, look, send out to all of your members, just send out an email, say, look, we want to support these international students. So, in 3 weeks' time on the roster, that's our opportunity. We're just going to do a shout out, just provide 2 items of food. We'll bring a truck around, completely safety under all the safety guidelines, and we'll go and deliver that to 1 or more of these sites for these kids. So sport is making a really significant contribution in many, many ways, and very localised and unique often to those specific communities.
Right. Can international students get involved in this, either from being a part of delivering the food, or how would they even access this?
Yeah. So what happened here? The reason, just to finish that, at Edison Road, we were contacted by a group called United for Colombia. So that was predominantly Colombian students, and they had about 250 students. Subsequently, there were 2 more student organisations who came with over 5,000. So so what we've said is, and I put a shout out to students in all across Sydney and said, this organisation, there's about 4 or 5. We've got hot meals being delivered over in the east of Sydney. So we've connected a group of social enterprises and charity organisations. this group here is food hampers. That's boxes that last about a week. We've got up the road Exodus Foundation, Reverend Bill Cruz, fantastic human being. They're providing hot meals. There's another social enterprise restaurant doing likewise, and we've got 2 other restaurants. So we've got 4 or 5 restaurants plus this, feeding, several thousand international students, So last Friday here was over 400 students just come to pick up boxes from all over Sydney, right? So it's really been fabulous to see this organisation respond, and sport has played a big part in that, with funding and actually, people here packing boxes, including Sydney Swans, Ty Kennelly, the assistant coach of the Swans, was here. We had Kieran Jack, and we had Kyle Parker, Luke Parker, the current captain. And we've had, everyone, cricket, baseball, and the whole lot. So really great. So for students, yes, if they're in need, they can reach out to me through my social media, various channels, and I can at least find organisations in those places who can step up and help. And certainly sport is willing to do so all around the country. Otherwise, they can go to playforlives.org, and they can register there if they'd like to find a local charity and something that they can actually commit to and support other vulnerable communities right now.
Wow. And I mean, it sounds like there's a really good fit here with the international education sector, because there's a lot of touch points where international students already go for help, such as their managed student accommodation, their education providers, even some government drop-in centres. Some of them are closed, but they will be reopening hopefully soon. Can they get involved with something like this?
Yeah, look, it's just about filling need. Okay, so, I've reached out to some people in South Australia and down in Victoria who now have a package for students, which is wonderful. But, even in South Australia, that package is like $500. Well, these students that I'm meeting every day here and at other organisations in Sydney and in Brisbane, those guys have got rent, they've got living costs, they've got the fees that they still need to pay for the tertiary education providers, and they need to get food. So many are saying, listen, it's either rent or food, okay? Or it's fees and some food and no rent. So many are couch surfing. We've got rising homelessness. It's a serious problem, and we need to all come together. In the absence of a national funding package, we're just calling on people to say, let's not let these guys suffer like so many other vulnerable communities. Just do whatever you can. So it's just about filling these needs in your local area. If people want to help, they can get in touch with me. They've only got to, get me through. Well, I'm at craig.foster@sbs.com.au. If they want to get in touch with me at SBS, people who want to help the students, or indeed student organisations in need of help, and we'll see what we can arrange.
Wow. Okay. All right. We'll definitely pass that message on. I mean, it's got the DNA of a fantastic social movement here, and I know that you're a big part of that. I guess once the curve flattens and life resumes to some semblance of normality, are you looking to turn this into something long term, or is it just to fill that need right now?
Well, it started just as a response to COVID, but of course, one of the underlying motivations was that I'd love to bring sport closer to vulnerable communities and closer to the social service sector, and give sport an opportunity to reconnect from professional level back down to its own grassroots and community. So I'll give you an example. Many professional sporting clubs have done a wonderful job during this time, but typically what they will do is 2 things. They will divert or revert to default, which is, let's look after our athletes, let's look after our staff, of course, like every institution. Then let's look after our fans and our members. And what this platform is about is saying, yes, but let's look after everyone. Sports social responsibility is not only those who are paying memberships for our club. Okay, it's not only the people who are currently involved, it's all of society. Sport has a responsibility as a major, influential, high-profile social institution in Australia to help where it possibly can. So the idea is to get out actually beyond your members and help vulnerable communities in need that you wouldn't otherwise connect with. And the hope is that through that, and this is out of my hands, but the hope is that by doing so, athletes and participants, so we're talking community and professional, and clubs at both levels, can create new social connections, new relationships that they can continue to build on in future. And finally, one of the reasons why it was so important to do it is because COVID is about breaking social connections. Okay, and that's why everyone has immediately said, well, we need to connect digitally. It's like this, right? So all of a sudden, every sport has, programs for people to be at home and to do the exercise and all of these things. So COVID both challenged our social structures, but it also exposed probably the lack of them. So, what it did is it made people reflect and sit at home and say, well, you know what? I'm working all these hours and I'm doing all these things and I'm chasing all these things, but I'm not really connecting with my family, and I could spend more time with my friends and start to question what it is they want out of life and so on. Well, that connectivity, this sense of community, is something I believe in very strongly. And sport is a fundamental part of community. In every community in the country, in the world, almost, sporting clubs are part of the very social fabric, right? Of how people connect, get together, integrate into society, new migrants, new communities, through sporting clubs, their own or locally based. Sport provides them a vehicle to meet people, to connect, to learn English. So sport's an incredibly important vehicle in social cohesion and connectivity. And recent research has made very clear that social connections and integration are two of the most important mortality factors, which is interesting. Research out of the ANU. And what that says is we all think that smoking is bad and pollution is horrible, but actually humans are social creatures. We are community-based animals, and that we need those connections. Our life can't be lived alone, right? And so that's what's important here. So the idea was to get sport to really strengthen not only its, but strengthen Australia's community resilience through this. So I thought that sport could actually get us to a point after COVID where we're actually stronger in communities. By sport connecting with charities and vulnerable communities that haven't before, we're actually creating new nodes of connection, because the others will endure. We actually want new ones through this. We want to come out on the back of this with a stronger sense of local community connection, and sport can make that happen.
Yeah, there's it's incredible to see during a time of need, just like a global pandemic. There's a tendency to shine a light on which parts of the communities do get benefit and those don't, and it's really incredible. Well, it's heartbreaking as well to see just how much vulnerable communities are left behind when it comes to this. And it does take me to my next question about vulnerable communities in general. After the release of the Bahraini footballer Hakeem Al Arabi in 2019, you spoke about Australia's treatment of asylum seekers, stating that Australia needed to step back and consider as a nation who we are and what we stand for. During that experience, you saw up close the worst and the best of how governments deal with vulnerable communities at a time of need. What stuck with you during that time, and what kind of nation should we aim to be?
Okay, well, that's a big question. That's a good one.
Sorry.
But what I would say is that, yes, that experience did give me a sense of Australia on the global stage, which I was kind of my mind was there anyway. What sort of global citizen is Australia? Who are we? What's our contribution globally? And you've seen what we've done on climate change and so on. And it's interesting that now, we've largely removed ourselves from the international agreements or the conventions on refugees and asylum seekers, and we've done that through the Immigration Act by largely legislating most of our obligations under that instrument by legislating them away, which any of you law students know is possible in Australia in a dualist system, in a dualist legal system, domestic and international law. But so what that meant is it gave me a sense of, where we're at in terms of refugees globally, what our treatment of them is saying about us on the global stage. And any Australian who lives abroad will tell you, that they look back and they watch what's happening, and many of them are just kind of, staggered that it can occur. And I am as well. And then you've got the climate. So what's happened now is really interesting in terms of our global citizenry. On climate change, we're saying no, we don't want really a part of it. We want to some creative accounting, but we don't really want to commit, with the rest of the planet. And so we're not a part of that. And then we kind of say, you know, publicly, well, listen, we're not going to be told what to do by, you know, this nebulous global group, you know, of leadership. You know, we're you know, we have our own national sanctity, sovereignty, and, you know, that's more important than us there. No one can tell us what to do. Okay. And then in the same breath, only a couple of months later, when COVID hits, we now say, well, we want to see, if not lead, a global response and independent inquiry from the League of Nations into what's happened in China to make sure everyone's safe. So, you know, President Macron in France said, well, whoa, hang on, guys. You know, basically said, look, well, USA would have to be involved in that. But what he's really saying was, hang on, you know, if we're all going to collaborate globally, well, let's do it then. Okay. And I happen to think that Australia should be a real leader in that. Right. And we're certainly not at the moment. I'm pleased that we've asked for this global response because that's important. So that's the international context. And through that, I saw our treatment of asylum seekers and refugees, which many of us were already aggrieved about. And what happened with Hakeem was just an opportunity to amplify that and really say, okay, well, now we've all done wonderful work, all of Australia, well done. You've done incredible work and gone and really saved this kid's life and got him back from Bangkok. But in the same breath, you know, you need to understand, we all need to understand, because we're all part of it, because none of us are picketing Parliament House right now, right? There's much more that every single one of us can do. So I'm part of it. And so is every single Australian. At the same time, we've demonised and treated a group of asylum seekers and refugees, predominantly, overwhelmingly, have been acknowledged as refugees, offshore and also onshore. And the way they've been treated for 7 years is truly unbelievable. It actually is incredulous. And the only way you can do that is if a population is convinced somehow through popular media and through diversion of language. You know, even language has been changed to explain these people, right? You know, and, you know, that they're illegals, when of course it's legal to seek asylum. So terminology has been shifted and, you know, grotesquely to position these people in an unfair manner. And so 7 years later, they're still suffering. And, you know, I'm in touch with some of them here this morning from Port Moresby who are just in a horrible state. So if you can imagine all the students and people sitting at home and thinking how bad this is. And one of the great ironies is that, you know, we're all isolated. I mean, I'm volunteering, but when not, I'm at home. So we're actually isolated. And it's true that everyone says, look, it's really difficult because we're cut off from social connections. We're cut off from these things, right? Well, these people have been behind walls for 7 years and we've had about a month.
Yeah.
Okay. And Australia should really seriously reflect on that. So, you know, you know, I studied human rights recently in my law degree that I completed, and human rights is something that I believe in very strongly. I think the international legal framework is very important to the planet. To me, it's a universal set of standards that can evolve, but nevertheless, I believe in a universal set of values and standards for all humanity, because across all cultures and religions, there's a great deal of variance and difference, and we have to have something between all humans to bind us together to say that's simply not possible. We must at least treat each other in this way. And we can disagree on things, but at least you are a human being. And however you dress, talk, whatever your language is, whatever your color is, whatever you look, whatever you've done, you're still a human, and so am I. And I will not go below this. Okay, and that's the international community needs to make, and that's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the relevant optional protocols and conventions. And so we've gone below that. We have treated human beings in a way that is reprehensible just from person to person. And that's because it's been deeply politicized and for many other reasons, right? So I feel an obligation to try and help. I went to Port Moresby to meet these guys over there. And I went down to the Mantra in Melbourne to help them as well. And all we're doing is just calling on Australia to say, just let these people go. Provide a safe, durable solution and let them get on with their lives. If you can't see your friends and family for a month, they've been cut off from them for 7 years. And
Yeah.
people have had family members leave, die. You know, you can't imagine the trauma that has come through this. We have deeply traumatized thousands of people. And I work and support a whole range of legal aid organisations and asylum seeker centres and all these. I actually see the cases. Okay, I see them. And Australia would do well to see them as well, personally, because Australia is full of great people. But we do our best work when we're touched in the heart by bushfires or by Hakeem or by seeing something real. And they haven't seen the asylum seekers and refugees yet because they've been turned into something they're not. And we need to turn them into human beings. And Australia then hopefully are going to say to everyone, including whoever's in government, because this is multiple governments, they're going to then say, enough is enough. Let these poor people go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a look at your TED talk where you talked about people first, then policy. It was a fascinating insight into some things that I think people are really considering now. And I guess I'm struck by the bubbling up of a sense of humanity on social media from people around Australia when they start realizing that just how badly some parts of the community are going through this. I might have one last question regarding international students, and you know, as a high profile figure, you would understand the importance of brand image across Australia. Do you think that the way that international students and vulnerable communities across Australia are being treated right now will impact our global reputation as a safe and supportive destination in the future?
Okay, firstly, let me deal with the brand issue. So to me, no, I'm not big on brand or branding. What I do is I just spend my life working on or in things that I feel strongly about and that I believe in, and treating people well. You know, for example, at the moment, you know, I'm fasting just to support my friends in the Muslim community of Australia, and to reflect on, you know, the 750 million odd people who live on less than $1.90 US per day, you know, by fasting throughout this time, and to get some type of, you know, it's impossible, but to try and at least get some sense to be able to reflect on what those people actually go through. And I don't think you can when you live in the way that we do, and every day you're having 3 meals, probably overeating, and going to the gym to try and work that off. You know, when people, you know, as we're here in Edison Road Community Centre, people actually don't have a meal tonight. Okay, so, and the reason, you know, for doing that is because I feel strongly that Australia as a multicultural nation is about reaching out through all communities and differences, and, you know, through our shared values, you know, and our Western democracy, you know, and our rule of law, and all the things that makes Australia wonderful, but not demonising anyone. And the Muslim community have been marginalised, demonised in recent years, and I think they need support. So I like to provide, you know, I have some public profile, for better or worse, and I like to provide it particularly to people who don't have it and need it. You know, so I don't fight for things that I think others can achieve already. I like to try and help people who are feeling marginalised and isolated. And I think in what Australia stands for is making everyone feel included and having those conversations. And that social trust and connection and friendship is incredibly important in times of stress, you know, in times of disaster, you know, in times of threats and these types of things. That's when those dividends pay off. So the reason I mention that is because, you know, I do many things which is not about a popularity, and asylum seekers and refugees, it's got nothing to do with popularity or brand. It's about just trying to help some human beings. And I really don't care where it ends. You know, I don't care what really the response is. I just want to see Australia improve in that aspect and become better at, you know, who we are and who we should be. So, you know, so that's the response to the brand. And what was the second part of the question?
It was about whether or not this will impact the way that we're perceived internationally.
Look, I think there must be some damage to our international reputation in terms of a safe, welcoming destination for international students. I mean, it would be impossible to say otherwise. I hope there isn't. I think the education sector is really important. There'll be some adjustments, I think, in that education sector about perhaps some of their reliance on international students. Nevertheless, I hope that's not the case, but I would very much understand if there was. You know, these are kids, predominantly, right? They're kids. And as someone said to me here, you know, a couple of hundred of them turned up, and I was talking to them in an interview and saying, what's happening? And someone said, you know, their parents released them to Australia as a safe destination, you know, as a place where the rule of law, you know, exists, where they think they're going to be safe. You know, if they behave themselves, you know, they're not going to be arbitrarily detained or thrown in jail, which you never know in many cases of the world, right? You know, a place where they can learn English, a place where they can be safe, build their life, perhaps move on, go back with skills, or stay. And what we've said to those parents is, well, you know what, we take your money, but, you know, when you know, stuff hits the fan, you know, they're not really part of us, you know. And I just, you know, I think that's really sad for Australia. So
Yeah.
I hope that I think some repair is happening now. Universities are starting to provide some support. There clearly was an issue between the government and the universities about where the obligation lay. You know, my personal view happens to be that it should be, you know, bilateral, that it's on both sides, which is kind of where they've got to now. But certainly both sides do have obligations to support for different reasons. And I hope that, you know, we'll be able to rebuild that trust, because there's no question that we've damaged it.
Craig Foster, thank you very much for your advocacy and support of international students and vulnerable communities. Appreciate your time today, and all the best with Play for Lives initiative. And you're a good quality human being. Thanks a lot.
Right. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Good to chat.